I had planned to talk about last Thursday's election results, but by now, on Tuesday, I'm sure we've all seen the papers and seen the news bulletins where the Remainers are declaring victory with their creative vote counting. So I'm not going to talk about that today. Instead, I'm going to talk about the race for presidency. There was a programme on the BBC, I think it was 10 days ago, something like that, where there were debates. Now, I don't know if you saw it, but it's really worth watching. It's very interesting and raises some quite disturbing issues. I'm going to stop talking now and introduce you to the 6 candidates.
Ce que je souhaite, c'est avoir une Europe évidemment plus démocratique, plus sociale et plus écologique.
I want Europe to be stable, democratic and ambitious for the future.
Manfred Weber.
Europe must remain free, Europe must become fair, and Europe must become sustainable.
The European Union to be ecological, social and democratic.
I want the European Union to become multi-speed, multi-currency and multipolar.
I want the European Union to be like home, to be sustainable and to be a place where you feel safe.
Before I take a look at the debate, I just want to show you a couple of things to think about. There were many points made during the debates about the climate change and the environment in general. It's a big thing at the moment, and the Green Party did really well Europe-wide in the recent European elections. So take a look at this film, and then I'll show you what the candidates had to say on climate change.
And the global warming alarm is dressed up as science, but it's not science. It's propaganda.
There's no direct evidence which links 20th century global warming to anthropogenic greenhouse gases.
We're just being told lies. That's what it comes down to.
You can't say that CO2 will drive climate. It certainly never did in the past.
If the CO2 increases in the atmosphere as a greenhouse gas, then the temperature will go up. But the ice core record shows exactly the opposite. So the fundamental assumption, the most fundamental assumption of the whole theory of climate change due to humans is shown to be wrong.
The whole thing stinks.
Man-made global warming is no longer just a theory about climate. It is the defining moral and political cause of our age. Campaigners say the time for debate is over. Any criticism, no matter how scientifically rigorous, is illegitimate. Even worse, dangerous. But in this film, it will be shown that the Earth's climate is always changing, that there is nothing unusual about the current temperature, and that the scientific evidence does not support the notion that climate is driven by carbon dioxide, man-made or otherwise. Everywhere you are told that man-made climate change is proved beyond doubt, but you are being told lies.
When people say we don't believe in global warming, I say, no, I believe in global warming. I don't believe that human CO2 is causing that warming.
A few years ago, if you would ask me, I would tell you it's CO2. Why? Because just like everyone else in the public, I listen to what the media had to say.
Each day, the news reports grow more fantastically apocalyptic. Politicians no longer dare to express any doubt about climate change.
There is such intolerance of any dissenting voice.
Are some of the worst climate criminals on the planet.
This is the most politically incorrect thing possible, is to doubt this climate change orthodoxy.
Global warming has gone beyond politics. It is a new kind of morality.
Now, the Prime Minister's back from his holidays, unrepentant and unembarrassed about yet another long-haul destination.
Yet, as the frenzy over man-made global warming grows shriller, many senior climate scientists say the actual scientific basis for the theory is crumbling.
There were periods, for example, in Earth's history when we had 3 times as much CO2 as we have today, or periods when we had 10 times as much CO2 as we have today. And if CO2 has a large effect on climate, then you should see it in the temperature reconstruction.
If we look at climate through the geological time frame, we would never suspect CO2 as a major climate driver.
None of the major climate changes in the last 1,000 years can be explained by CO2.
You can't say that CO2 will drive climate. It certainly never did in the past.
I've often heard it said that there is a consensus of thousands of scientists on the global warming issue and that humans are causing a catastrophic change to the climate system. Well, I am one scientist, and there are many that simply think that is not true.
Man-made global warming is no ordinary scientific theory.
This morning, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change made up of...
It is presented in the media as having the stamp of authority of an impressive international organisation.
From the IPCC,
the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC.
The IPCC, like any UN body, is political. The final conclusions are politically driven.
This claim that the IPCC is the world's top 1,500 or 2,500 scientists, you look at the bibliographies of the people and it's simply not true. There are quite a number of non-scientists.
And to build the number up to 2,500, they have to start taking reviewers and government people and so on, anyone who ever came close to them. And none of them are asked to agree. Many of them disagree.
Those people who are specialists but don't agree with the polemic and resign, and there have been a number that I know of, they are simply put on the author list and become part of this 2,500 of the world's top scientists.
People have decided you have to convince other people that since no scientist disagrees, you shouldn't disagree either. But that, whenever you hear that in science, that's pure propaganda.
This is the story of how a theory about climate turned into a political ideology.
See, I don't even like to call it the environmental movement anymore, because really it is a political activist movement, and they have become hugely influential at a global level.
It is the story of the distortion of a whole area of science.
Climate scientists need there to be a problem in order to get funding.
We have a vested interest in creating panic, because then money will flow to climate science.
There's one thing you shouldn't say, and that is, this might not be a problem.
It is the story of how a political campaign turned into a bureaucratic bandwagon.
Fact of the matter is that tens of thousands of jobs depend upon global warming right now. It's a big business.
It's become a great industry in itself. And if the whole global warming farrago collapsed, there'd be an awful lot of people out of jobs and looking for work.
This is a story of censorship and intimidation.
I have seen and heard their spitting fury at anybody who might disagree with them, which is not the scientific way.
It is a story about Westerners invoking the threat of climatic disaster to hinder vital industrial progress in the developing world.
One clear thing that emerges from the whole environmental debates is the point that there's somebody keen to kill the African dream, and the African dream is to develop.
The environmental movement has evolved into the strongest force there is for preventing development in the developing countries.
The global warming story is a cautionary tale of how a media scare became the defining idea of a generation.
The whole global warming business has become like a religion. And people who disagree are called heretics. I'm a heretic. The makers of this program are all heretics.
In 2005, a House of Lords inquiry was set up to examine the scientific evidence of man-made global warming. A leading figure in that inquiry was Lord Lawson of Blaby, who, as Chancellor of the Exchequer in the 1980s, was the first politician to commit government money to global warming research.
We had a very, very thorough inquiry, took evidence from a whole lot of people expert in this area and produced a report. What surprised me was to discover how weak and uncertain the science was. In fact, there are more and more thoughtful people, some of them a little bit frightened to come out in the open, but who quietly, privately, and some of them publicly, are saying, hang on, wait a minute, this simply doesn't add up.
We are told that the Earth's climate is changing. But the Earth's climate is always changing. In Earth's long history, there have been countless periods when it was much warmer and much cooler than it is today, when much of the world was covered by tropical forests, or else vast ice sheets. The climate has always changed, and changed without any help from us humans. We can trace the present warming trend back at least 200 years, to the end of a very cold period in Earth's history. This cold spell is known to climatologists as the Little Ice Age.
Let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. It doesn't show signs of stop.
In the 14th century, Europe plunged into the Little Ice Age. And where we'd look for evidence of this are the old illustrations and prints and pictures of Old Father Thames.
Well, that was the film. Certainly gives you something to think about, doesn't it? Do you reckon the government's been lying to us all these years? I think anything's possible, actually. Anyway, let's crack on and have a look at the debates. And let's see them talking about climate change.
Would you be more ambitious on climate protection than the actual acting Commission now?
2050, to achieve a European Union which is carbon neutral. That is our common goal, and that's why I cannot understand why we create here divisions when we have common understanding about what to do for the future. The EPP is clearly committed to this goal. But on the way, how we achieve this, there are discussions necessary, because I don't accept that the losers of the development will be the pensioners, the poor people in our societies, will be the industrial workers of the car industry. We have a lot of concerns about whether they can manage this transitional period. There are a lot of concerns on the table, rural areas again. And that's why we have to make it in a way that everybody can respect it. And when I refer to my EPP party, I tell you it was the Commissioner Arias Canetti, an EPP commissioner, who presented all the initiatives in the fight against climate change. Our day achievements are together with the EPP voice, and I will continue.
Thank you, Manfred Weber. Franz Timmermans, you want to challenge?
Well, just very briefly, I mean, we just, an NGO went through the voting in the European Parliament over the last 5 years, and they called the EPP dinosaurs. So there is a problem there. It's not my word, it's what the NGO did, just looking at the voting. But secondly, I'm sick and tired of the excuse it's going to hurt pensioners, it's going to hurt socially weak people. You know what's really going to hurt? If we do nothing. If we do nothing, we will be in a climate crisis of incredible proportions. If we do nothing, it's the poor people who will suffer first. They have no way to go somewhere else to avoid this crisis. We need to act. The longer we wait, the more expensive it is and the harder it is on poor people.
Manfred Weber.
Again, from Franz Timmermans, great words, but not concrete actions, you see. We need concrete actions now, and that is necessary for achieving the goal. And I tell you, the trade emission system which we established into the European Union, we can expand this to the aviation sector. That would be an important step. Or to look for the question how we can now boost innovation. I believe as an engineer, I am an environmental engineer by my profession. I believe in innovation, not in punishment, not in bans, not in regulatory framework. I believe in innovation, and that's why establishing an horizon which is investing in technologies which are capable to solve the problems, that is what we have to do.
Okay, but I also climate protection, or perhaps less.
Look, I came from that part of Europe, Central Eastern Europe, which 30 years ago was one of the most polluted parts, not only of Europe, but of the world. Now, over those 30 years, we have reduced the air pollution for hundreds of %. So it is achievable, but it has to be done in a socially sustainable way and gradually, while introducing new technologies. And that's what I'm calling for. Socially sustainable way and gradual phasing, right timetable. So let's not put unrealistic targets ahead of us. Let's commit those commitments. Let's fulfill those commitments we have signed, for instance, the Paris Climate Agreement. And when it comes to the Commission could and should change the way how, for instance, our subsidies from a common agriculture policy paid. They should be more environmentally oriented, more subsidized organic farming, small farming, and not only production oriented. And there is one more, actually, a good program which was already devised by the Commission, and I have to praise the Commission for that. It's called 1 hectare. And this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank the young people who, for the many weeks now, have been going out on the streets because they get the impression that they are not being listened to. And it's true, they haven't been listened to. We hear lots of fine words from European politicians, but there haven't been any concrete measures taken. We are not attacking the big polluters, the multinationals who are responsible for more than 70% of pollution at the international level. We're doing nothing there. Rather, we're pushing this on to citizens, taxing the citizens, as Macron has done in France. That is totally unacceptable. There is an industrial tradition in Europe, Galileo, Airbus. Why can't we go back to taking a public initiative to deal with the climate crisis? We can't simply say there's no money, we found $3 billion to save the banks. And Mr. Timmermans, tax evasion is at about 800 billion.
Well, of course, it's a risk, but I think we can make the most of it by looking at it as an opportunity, because millions of jobs can be created. For instance, building high-speed rails in Europe to connect our cities, to make sure that people can get around, out of the planes, down to the trains.
I had to play that bit back several times. She really did say, get out of the planes and onto the trains. This is during a debate about climate change, where they're worried about transport ruining the environment, much CO2, and yet she's talking about high-speed rail trains and getting off the planes and getting onto the trains. I found that incredible.
If these politicians get their way and phase out industries which they consider harmful to the environment, many of our industry workers will be out of a job. These include steel, coal and car manufacturing, as well as other transports. If we have to get rid of them, this will cause many low-skilled workers to lose their jobs. It will also have a knock-on effect. If there are only electric vehicles, then they won't need garage workers or breakdown recovery. And the people needed in a petrol garage will be zero. You know, I've listened to the whole of these debates 4 times now, and to me, I'm getting the impression that the EU is only interested in people under 45. It wants to create new industries, new green industries for young people. Climate change policies go hand in hand with technological developments, which the EU has big plans for. These can be found in full on europa.eu. In several different places. The latest set of documents, there are 16 PDFs, can be found under the Sibiu segment. The EIB has loaned billions of euros to state members for technological developments. These include health, transport, thermo-modernisation projects and a power link from mainland Greece to Crete. It's 132 kilometres submarine connection to provide electricity. Spain received 70 million euros to digitise CaixaBank. They're testing a cashless system where you have to pay for everything by a mobile phone, encouraging everyone, so they're not considering the old people in this, to everyone to own a phone, despite the obvious impact they have on the environment, according to their studies. To me, the EU is full of contradictions. They're worried about CO2 emissions, and yet technology is proven to be damaging to the environment. Let's have a look at this article I found in the Irish Times. Smartphones and data centres are damaging to the environment and will have the biggest carbon footprint in the tech industry by 2040. Scientists came to this conclusion after calculating the carbon footprint of devices such as mobile phones, laptops, tablets and desktops, as well as data centres and communication networks, known as ICT. The team from McMaster University in Canada found smartphones to be the most damaging of all devices in the industry, with the bulk of their emissions coming from the production chain. According to the researchers, smartphone components that require the most amount of energy to produce are the chip and the motherboard, as they are made up of precious metals mined at high cost. While these phones consume little energy to operate, 85% of their emissions impact come from production. They also have a short shelf life, which according to the team means this is an extraordinary amount of waste. Not only this, I found a table which tells you exactly how harmful technology is to the environment. Have a look at this.
I'm going to leave it there as far as climate change is concerned. I have so much more material, but it's time to move on to the next topic, which is migration.
The fracture, the tensions we see about migrations, would you, as a Commission President, drop the efforts to find a common solution? And if not, how do you solve the problem? The question goes to Mr. Zahradil, please.
Thank you. First of all, I have to say that I would never repeat the same mistake like the current Commission by introducing mandatory quota, which unfortunately didn't work, and which unfortunately only deepened the divide between eastern part and western part of Europe. I believe that we should find another solutions. We should respect the sovereign right of governments and parliaments in member states to grant or not to grant asylum, to grant or not to grant temporary or permanent settlement or even citizenship. What we have to do is, however, to fight human trafficking and human smuggling. What we have to do is to outsource reception centers to outside of the European Union, otherwise we won't be able to fight trafficking and smuggling. We, of course, have to somehow conduct readmission agreements with other countries, and that they will be willing, so we have to cooperate closely. And first of all, we have to help stabilize situation in Africa.
How refreshing that a European politician recognises the fact that individual member states should have the right to say who comes into their country and who doesn't. It shouldn't be up to the EU. It should be, each country should be taken on its own merit. What is needed is a responsible migration programme whereby the people coming into a country should have the means to support themselves, somewhere to live and a job to go to.
Weber, what would you do?
The only chance is a European solution, no doubt about this. And there are two main pillars for us as EPP. One pillar is that the state controls who is arriving in Europe and not the smugglers. So we have to win back the control on our border, and that must be clear. That's why we ask for 10,000 Frontex officers immediately established to control the borders. The second element is when Pope Francis is in front of the Mediterranean Sea in Lampedusa and is reminding us on our humanitarian responsibility, we have to take over this responsibility. We have to care. That means resettlement for Syria. That means a big Marshall Plan for Africa. I want to establish a commissioner only dealing with African interests to make also from the structure of the Commission clear that we prioritize on these things. And there are the two sides of the medal, strict border control and humanitarian responsibility. And my party did it. So Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, we showed that we take over responsibility, and Angela Merkel, together with Jean-Claude Juncker, showed also that we are ready to have a Turkey agreement where we win back the control on our border. So both elements are crucial.
Thank you very much, Manfred Weber.
It's no surprise that Manfred Weber, being of the CDU, he isn't willing to allow individual countries to decide on the problem of migration. He wants it all contained within the EU. Now, the EU has already agreed to equip the borders with 10,000 staff, 5,000 by 2021, another 5,000 by 2027. But Weber wants this to happen more quickly. The idea on the whole isn't that popular, even with countries who are tough on migration. They don't want to hand border control over to the EU. He also pledges to put a stop to human trafficking, which is even more difficult than controlling migration. The 10,000 border force wouldn't be enough anyway to patrol the entire EU's borders. In my opinion, the idea is impractical and merely a ploy to gain popularity.
Well, let me recall that immigration is first and foremost a human drama, and I'm actually the son of an illegal immigrant. My parents arrived here without any documents, and more than 30,000 people have been killed in the Mediterranean. 50 people were killed just yesterday in the Mediterranean when a boat capsized. And I think the European Union has a great responsibility here, and all of the policies that have led to destabilization need to be revised. For the European left, we believe that migration is an opportunity. I'm an example of that. This is an opportunity for a series of people who don't have the opportunity back home in their countries to flourish. For us, we don't believe that it's about the invasion of Europe. We're talking about 0.5% of the population, and these people can contribute to rejuvenating Europe. I am the son of a migrant, and I think the statement of Mr. Weber, where he talked about a final solution for immigration, is scandalous.
Thank you. Margaret Vestager, what would
As I've already said, countries can't be expected to take in millions of migrants, many of which are unskilled. It's not practical. He mentioned that the figure is only 0.5% of the population, which doesn't sound an awful lot when you make a percentage out of it. However, in reality, this is about 35 million people. This is more than half the population of the UK.
Thank you. Margaret Vestager, what would you do when migrants are arriving on ships like the Aquarius, for example?
Well, I think the important thing is to treat sort of the long-term stable solution with the same urgency as saving life at sea. Because otherwise we will never get to a solution, because migration is here to stay, because of climate change, because of changes in economic conditions. But the most important thing is that I see Europeans having an open, big heart for refugees, to protect people in need of protection. And at the same time, to expect us to find ways to manage migration and to make it legal. Because we cannot have people coming and going without knowing. And in that, of course, we need exactly common solutions. We need a common asylum system, and we need a common solidarity. And we can discuss how to make that happen, but we need to do that together, because otherwise we'd fail.
Well, as we just heard, she partly blames migration on climate change. She also says it should be made legal with a common asylum system. The EU has been making steps towards this since 1999 with the Treaty of Amsterdam. Now, this lady says that migration must be legal, yet she also says that we should welcome the boatloads of people who turn up on our shores. Now, how can you control migration when you don't know who's coming in? Anyone can turn up and wander off. You don't know who they are, where they're going. She also seems to confuse migration and asylum, incorporating the latter into her reply on migration. I just want to clarify what is meant by the common asylum system. An asylum seeker is a political refugee, and the common asylum system means that all member states should take in migrants and have a shared responsibility. Now, a migrant is someone who chooses to move. A refugee is forced.
So we heard a lot about what we should do. Franz Timmermans, as acting first vice president of the Commission, saw what is difficult to do. What could be done better under your watch as president of the European Commission?
I think, first of all, every time a person dies in the Mediterranean, Europe loses a bit of its soul. So we're losing who we are. We're losing our values by not solving this problem. Secondly, once people are on boats in the Mediterranean, you have to take care of these people. And you shouldn't put fines on fishermen or other people in other boats who rescue people at sea like the Italian government is doing now. That is unacceptable. Thirdly, you have to prevent people from getting on those boats in the first place. And for that, you really need, I agree with Manfred Weber, a huge plan for Africa. You need to understand that Europe's destiny is linked to Africa's destiny. But only with these measures and better border protection and agreements with third countries, we will not solve it. We also need solidarity in Europe. Solidarity is not just for things you like, it's also sometimes for things you don't like. And if Central and Eastern European countries continue to refuse solidarity, sooner or later, borders will be back in Europe where they don't belong. And that would be to the detriment of every citizen in Europe. We need to prevent that. We need solidarity.
Gives a clear perspective. Thank you.
Well, I completely disagree with him. You should fine the people who pick up them in the Med. There needs to be a deterrent to stop them from coming. If they didn't think they were going to be picked up from the sea, they maybe wouldn't come. Now, in the Channel, a popular trick they do is they get a few miles from the French coast. When they're in UK waters, call the Coast Guard, so they get a free ride to the UK shores. Now, if they were genuine refugees, they'd be grateful for the safety of the first country they got to, that there was a safe place to stay. They wouldn't want to come over the Channel to us. These are economic migrants. They are not refugees.
President of European Commission, what would you do?
We stand clearly for a European solidarity. We need to fairly share the responsibility that we need to face. We also need to support the communities that are actually doing so much already to welcome people in need. Many cities, many people, many initiatives are helping. But really, what is absolutely unacceptable is what's happening right now in the Mediterranean. People are drowning, and we know where they are. They are calling the search and rescue center. No one is picking up the phone. The Italians are telling them to call the Libyans. In Libya, no one is answering the phone. There's a civil war in Libya. There is no coast guard, and we're even giving to those militias which call themselves coast guards support. This should not happen. We need to have a European search and rescue effort, because we should not allow that any single person dies in the Mediterranean.
Well, that was Ska Keller. I can't really add any more. I think she's really the same as Franz Timmermans. Ideas about how to deal with the migration crisis. Well, that's it. We've seen the 6 candidates put their intentions and ideas forward for migration and the climate. One of these 6 will replace Juncker in November. During the debate, they also discussed youth and tax havens, but I chose to discuss these 2 main topics, especially climate change, due to the fact that the Green Party gained so many seats in the recent elections. I'm not convinced that the people in the UK voted Green because they support Brexit. If they supported Remain, then surely the obvious choice would have been the Lib Dems. Out of these 6 candidates, I prefer Jan the Czech. He is the only Conservative in this lineup, so you don't need to be particularly good at maths to work out the odds of him getting the job. I believe Manfred Weber is a favourite to win, and due to the fact he is a member of Merkel's CDU, I have to agree that he is the likeliest candidate. It is the obvious choice to select a socialist president, as the last thing their parliament needs, from their point of view, is someone else to throw a spanner in the works of their European project. The media and the EU themselves are playing down the significance of the success of Eurosceptic parties, such as our Brexit Party, Lega in Italy and PIS in Poland, obviously not forgetting Viktor Orban in Hungary and Marine Le Pen in France. We don't have long to wait to find out who gets the president's job. Hopefully we will leave the EU and it will not matter to us who gets it.